Welcome, dear viewers, to a journey that will send shivers down your spine and make you question the very fabric of reality. Tonight, we delve into the darkest corners of California, a state known for its sunny beaches, Hollywood glamour, and the restless spirits that haunt its most infamous locations. Whether you're a skeptic or a true believer, these tales of terror will leave you questioning what lies beyond the veil of death. So, grab a blanket, turn off the lights, and prepare yourself for a night of unspeakable horrors. This is not just a video, it's an experience. And by the end, you may never look at California the same way again. The Queen Mary, Long Beach loomed like a spectral giant against the night sky, its towering funnels silhouetted by the pale glow of the moon. The ocean liner, once a symbol of luxury and grandeur, now sat dormant in Long Beach Harbor, a relic of a bygone era. But for those who dared to step aboard, the Queen Mary was far more than a museum or hotel. It was a gateway to the unknown. The camera panned across the ship's sleek, black hull, the waves lapping gently against its sides. The music swelled, a haunting melody that sent shivers down the spine. As the lens zoomed in on the ship's portholes, faint flickers of light seemed to dance behind the glass, though no one was there to turn them on. The Queen Mary, a narrator's voice intoned, once the pride of the Cunard Line, carried the world's elite across the Atlantic in unparalleled style. But beneath its opulent veneer lies a darker history, one of tragedy, death, and restless spirits. The scene shifted to archival footage of the ship in its heyday, passengers in elegant attire sipping champagne on the deck, the grand ballroom alive with music and laughter. But the mood quickly shifted. The screen darkened, and the music grew ominous. During World War II, the narrator continued, the Queen Mary was transformed into a troop ship, ferrying thousands of soldiers to the front lines. It was during this time that the ship earned the nickname the Grey Ghost, not only for its speed but for the horrors it witnessed. The camera cut to a reenactment of the ship's fateful collision with the HMS Curacao. The screen shook with the impact, and the cries of sailors filled the air. Over 300 men perished that day, their bodies lost to the cold, unforgiving sea. Their spirits, the narrator whispered, are said to linger aboard the Queen Mary, forever trapped between worlds. The scene transitioned to the ship's interior, where dimly lit hallways stretched into darkness. The engine room, the narrator explained, is one of the most haunted areas on the ship. It was here that a young crew member met a gruesome end, crushed to death by Door 13. His ghost, known as Half-Hatch Harry, is often seen lurking in the shadows, his anguished face a reminder of the ship's tragic past. The camera moved to the first-class swimming pool, now drained and empty. Here, the laughter of a young girl in a white dress has been heard echoing through the chamber. Some say she drowned in the pool decades ago, her spirit forever searching for her lost family. Finally, the screen showed the third-class cabins, their narrow bunks and peeling paint a stark contrast to the ship's former glory. Disembodied voices, phantom footsteps, and sudden drops in temperature are common here, the narrator said. Many believe these cabins are a hotspot for paranormal activity, a place where the veil between the living and the dead is at its thinnest. The camera pulled back, revealing the Queen Mary in its entirety, its once proud form now a haunting silhouette against the night. The Queen Mary, the narrator concluded, is more than a ship. It is a vessel of history, tragedy, and the unknown. For those brave enough to explore its decks, the line between past and present blurs, and the spirits of the past may not remain silent. As the screen faded to black, the faint sound of a ship's horn echoed in the distance, a chilling reminder that the Queen Mary's story was far from over. The Winchester Mystery House stood like a monolith of madness on the outskirts of San Jose, its jagged roofline and asymmetrical windows casting long, crooked shadows in the fading light. The camera panned slowly across the mansion's exterior, its Victorian architecture both grand and grotesque, as if the house itself were alive and breathing. The music swelled, a dissonant symphony of strings and whispers that set the tone for the story about to unfold. The screen transitioned to a dimly lit parlor, where a portrait of Sarah Winchester hung above a crackling fireplace. Her piercing eyes seemed to follow the viewer, her expression a mix of sorrow and determination. Sarah Winchester, the narrator's voice began, low and haunting, was a woman marked by tragedy. The heiress to the Winchester rifle fortune, she was once a symbol of wealth and privilege. But after the deaths of her husband, William, and their infant daughter, Annie, Sarah's life spiraled into a world of grief and paranoia. The scene shifted to a reenactment of Sarah's visit to a medium in Boston. The room was dark, lit only by the flickering light of a single candle. The medium, an elderly woman with a grave expression, leaned across the table, her voice trembling as she delivered her chilling prophecy. "The spirits of those killed by Winchester rifles," the medium intoned, "are restless. They blame you for their deaths. You must build a house that will never be finished. Only then can you appease their wrath." Sarah's face, pale and drawn, filled the screen. Her eyes widened in terror, and the camera zoomed in as she whispered, "I will build it. I will build it for them." The screen transitioned to a time-lapse of the Winchester Mystery House under construction. Workers hammered and sawed day and night, adding rooms, staircases, and hallways in a chaotic, seemingly endless frenzy. The house grew larger and more labyrinthine, its design defying all logic and reason. For 38 years, the narrator continued, Sarah Winchester oversaw the construction of her mansion. She employed a team of carpenters who worked around the clock, building and rebuilding, adding staircases that led to nowhere, doors that opened into walls, and windows that looked into other rooms. The house became a maze, a physical manifestation of Sarah's fractured mind and her desperate attempt to confuse the spirits she believed were haunting her. The camera moved through the house's interior, capturing its bizarre architecture. A staircase ascended to a ceiling with no door. A door opened to reveal a sheer drop to the garden below. A window in the floor offered a view of the room beneath. The music grew more discordant, the whispers louder, as if the house itself were alive and watching. The screen transitioned to a reenactment of Sarah's daily routine. She sat at a small desk in her seance room, surrounded by candles and strange artifacts. A clock on the wall ticked loudly, its hands moving erratically. Sarah closed her eyes and began to communicate with the spirits, her hands trembling as she scribbled notes on a piece of paper. Every night, the narrator explained, Sarah would retreat to her seance room, where she claimed to receive instructions from the spirits. These notes, often cryptic and nonsensical, dictated the next day's construction. It was as if the house was being built not by Sarah, but by the restless souls she sought to appease. The camera panned to a group of workers, their faces weary and apprehensive, as they followed Sarah's instructions. One man hesitated before hammering a nail into a wall, his eyes darting nervously to the shadows. Another whispered to his companion, "This place, it's not right. It's like the house doesn't want us here." The screen transitioned to present-day footage of the Winchester Mystery House, now a popular tourist attraction. Visitors wandered through its halls, their faces a mix of awe and unease. The camera followed a tour group as they entered a particularly eerie room, a narrow hallway with doors on either side, each leading to a dead end. "Today," the narrator said, "the Winchester Mystery House is a testament to one woman's obsession and the supernatural forces that may have guided her. Visitors have reported countless strange occurrences, whispers in empty rooms, cold spots that defy explanation, and shadowy figures darting through the halls." The camera zoomed in on a visitor's face as they described their experience. "I felt something brush past me," the woman said, her voice trembling. "But when I turned around, there was no one there." Another visitor, a man in his 30s, added, "I saw a figure in an old-fashioned dress standing at the end of the hallway. When I approached, she just disappeared." The screen transitioned to a reenactment of Sarah Winchester's final days. The elderly woman, now frail and hunched, wandered through the endless halls of her mansion, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She paused at a window, her reflection ghostly in the glass, and whispered, "I've built it for you. Please leave me in peace." Sarah Winchester died in her sleep in 1922, the narrator said, "but her presence is said to linger in the house she built. Some have claimed to see her ghost, forever wandering the halls, her face a mask of sorrow and regret." The camera moved through the house once more, capturing its eerie beauty and unsettling atmosphere. The music reached a crescendo, the whispers growing louder and more urgent, as if the spirits themselves were trying to communicate. The screen transitioned to a final shot of the Winchester Mystery House at night, its windows glowing faintly in the darkness. The narrator's voice returned, softer now, but no less haunting. Is the Winchester Mystery House a testament to one woman's madness? Or is it a prison for the souls she tried to outrun? The answers may lie within its twisted walls, if you dare to enter. As the screen faded to black, the whispers lingered, a chilling reminder that the Winchester Mystery House was more than just a mansion. It was a gateway to the unknown, a place where the past and present collided, and the spirits of the dead refused to be forgotten. The wind howled through the rusted bars of Alcatraz, its eerie wail whispering secrets long forgotten. The island, bathed in the cold glow of the San Francisco moon, stood as a silent sentinel of misery and despair. Though the prison had long since closed, the echoes of its tormented past refused to be silenced. It was late October when Sarah Carter arrived. A journalist with a fascination for the macabre, she had been granted special access to spend a night on Alcatraz, researching an article on the island's ghostly legends. Armed with only a flashlight, a notebook, and a recording device, she intended to uncover the truth behind the hauntings that plagued the forsaken prison. As she stepped off the boat, a dense fog rolled in, swallowing the island in a spectral embrace. The tour guide, an older man with deep-set eyes, met her at the dock. "You're brave to stay here alone," he said, his voice laced with something akin to warning. "Most don't last the night." Sarah chuckled nervously. "I don't scare easily." The guide only nodded, leading her toward the main cell house. The prison's walls loomed high above, casting jagged shadows in the moonlight. Once inside, the stale air pressed against her skin like a cold, unseen hand. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant lapping of waves against the shore. Sarah began her exploration in D Block, the most infamous section of Alcatraz. The solitary confinement cells, known as the Hole, had held prisoners in complete darkness for days, sometimes weeks. Legends spoke of an inmate who had screamed about glowing eyes watching him from the blackness, only to be found dead the next morning, his face frozen in terror. She ran her fingers over the rusted bars, pressing the record button on her device. "If there are any spirits here, make yourselves known." A pause. Silence. Then, a faint whisper. Sarah's breath hitched. She played the recording back. The whisper was barely audible, but it was there. A single word, run. A chill crept down her spine, but she pushed forward. Next, she made her way to the hospital wing. The air grew heavier, thick with the scent of decay and something metallic, blood, perhaps. A single wheelchair sat in the center of the room, its wheels eerily still. Sarah took a step closer when a sharp creak shattered the silence. The wheelchair moved. Sarah staggered back, her flashlight flickering. "It's just the wind," she muttered, though she didn't quite believe it. Then came the footsteps. Slow. Measured. Coming from the hallway behind her. Hard hammering. She turned, but the corridor was empty. She wasn't alone, and she knew it. She raised her camera, snapping pictures blindly. The flash illuminated the peeling paint, the long-forgotten medical equipment, and a figure. A man in a white coat stood at the end of the hall. His face was obscured, but his stance was rigid, unnatural. Sarah's breath caught. "Who are you?" she whispered. The figure didn't move. Then, as if the shadows themselves swallowed him whole, he was gone. Panic surged through her veins. She stumbled back toward the main cell block, her rational mind at war with the primal fear gripping her. Had she really seen something, or was it exhaustion playing tricks? Reaching the main hall, she gasped for breath. The exit was close, just a few feet away. Then she heard it. A sound that would haunt her forever. The unmistakable clang of a cell door slamming shut, and she wasn't the one who closed it. Every instinct screamed for her to run, but her body was paralyzed. The temperature dropped, her breath visible in the frigid air. A whisper, low and guttural, curled around her ear. "You shouldn't be here." Sarah's scream echoed through the empty prison as she bolted for the door. She ran until she reached the dock, her lungs burning, her heart threatening to burst from her chest. The tour guide stood there, watching her with knowing eyes. "You saw them, didn't you?" he asked. She could only nod, too shaken to speak. He sighed, handing her a warm blanket. "You're lucky. Some don't make it back." Sarah left Alcatraz that night, but the island never truly left her. In the days that followed, she reviewed her footage, her recordings. The whispers, the footsteps, the slamming door, everything had been captured, and in one of the photographs, standing in the doorway of a cell, was the man in the white coat. His eyes, empty and lifeless, staring straight at her. Sarah never returned to Alcatraz. But some nights, in the deepest hours before dawn, she would wake to the sound of metal bars rattling and a cold whisper curling through the darkness. The neon glow of Hollywood Boulevard flickered against the pavement as Emily Carter stepped out of her taxi. The Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel loomed before her, its grand Spanish colonial architecture standing as a timeless monument to Tinseltown's golden age. As a paranormal investigator and journalist, Emily had visited haunted locations across the country, but this one had always intrigued her. The Roosevelt wasn't just a hotel, it was a shrine to old Hollywood, where the spirits of long-gone stars still lingered in the shadows. The lobby buzzed with tourists and socialites sipping cocktails beneath the golden chandeliers, oblivious to the hotel's darker secrets. Emily checked in, her suite on the 9th floor waiting for her. Room 928. The very room where Montgomery Clift had once stayed while filming From Here to Eternity, and where guests claimed his spirit still roamed. Emily placed her bags on the vintage armchair and set up her recording equipment. The walls carried a weight, a presence, as if the past refused to fade. She ran her fingers over the brass keyhole of the closet door, wondering how many Hollywood legends had stood in the same spot. Preparing for a night on the town. As midnight approached, she conducted an EVP session. "If anyone is here, let me know," she said softly, placing the recorder on the nightstand. A minute passed. Then another, then a faint click. The closet door creaked open. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Slowly she rose, her hand trembling as she reached for her flashlight. A faint scent of cologne lingered in the air, rich and masculine, as if someone had just walked past her. She turned on the recorder and played back the audio. A whisper crackled through the speaker, "Leave." Her pulse pounded. She had spent years chasing ghosts, but this felt different. More personal. She sat on the bed, exhaling sharply. "Montgomery Clift?" she asked. "Are you here?" Silence. Then, from the other side of the room, the distinct sound of a trumpet playing a few notes. Soft, distant, yet undeniably real. Emily shot to her feet. The stories were true. Determined to explore further, she made her way downstairs to the Blossom Ballroom. The grand space, once home to lavish Hollywood galas, was now dark and empty, the air thick with nostalgia. As she set up her camera, a giggle echoed through the hall. A little girl's giggle. Emily froze. The ballroom was completely empty. "Hello?" she called out, scanning the dimly lit corners. A shadow moved near the stage. Hard hammering, she lifted her camera just in time to capture a fleeting image, a young girl in a vintage dress, twirling as if caught in the melody of a long-forgotten waltz. Then she vanished. Emily clutched her camera, her hands shaking. The Roosevelt was more than a historical landmark. It was a theater for the restless dead. By 3 a.m., she found herself in the hotel's most infamous location, Marilyn Monroe's old suite. It had been decades since the blonde bombshell had graced the world with her presence, yet many claimed her spirit never truly left. The mirror stood against the wall, framed in ornate gold. Emily approached cautiously, her reflection rippling in the dim light. She lifted her camera, snapping a photo. As the flash faded, she gasped. There, in the glass, was another reflection. A woman, lips painted in a perfect red, her blonde curls cascading over her shoulders. Marilyn. Emily turned sharply, but the room was empty. Her hands trembled as she checked the camera. The image was there, Marilyn standing behind her, her eyes sad, longing. A ghost forever trapped in the gilded glamour of a Hollywood that no longer existed. Emily left the Roosevelt at sunrise, the ghosts of old Hollywood still whispering in her mind. Some spirits never fade. Some stories never end, and in the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel, the past was still very much alive. The Whaley House stood solemnly against the San Diego night, its old wooden frame bathed in the eerie glow of the street lamps. The house had been many things over the years: a family home, a courthouse, a theater, but to those who knew its history, it was something much darker. It was a tomb for restless spirits, a place where the past never truly died. Journalist Claire Holloway arrived at the house just before midnight. A skeptic by nature, she had spent years debunking so-called haunted locations, attributing every bump in the night to creaky floors and overactive imaginations. But the Whaley House was different. Its legend loomed too large to ignore. She adjusted the strap of her camera bag and stepped onto the wooden porch, where the boards groaned beneath her weight. The tour guide, an older man with deep-set eyes, greeted her with a knowing smile. "You sure you want to do this alone?" he asked. "Most don't make it through the night." Claire smirked. "I think I'll be fine." The guide shrugged and handed her the key. "Lock the doors behind you. Sometimes the spirits like to wander." She stepped inside, inhaling the scent of aged wood and dust. The house was silent, save for the distant ticking of an old clock. Claire set up her equipment in the parlor, where Thomas Whaley himself had been seen on multiple occasions. She clicked on her recorder. "If there's anyone here," she said softly, "make yourself known." Silence, then a whisper. She played back the audio, her pulse quickening. The whisper was faint but unmistakable. "Get out." Claire's skepticism wavered, but she pressed on. Moving upstairs, she entered the room where Violet Whaley had taken her own life after suffering a devastating heartbreak. The air felt thick, suffocating. A deep sadness clung to the space like a lingering fog. She lifted her camera, snapping a photo of the antique bed. The flash illuminated the room for a brief second, and that was when she saw a figure, a woman in a Victorian dress, standing by the window. Claire's breath caught in her throat. She looked up, but the room was empty. Checking her camera, she gasped. The image was there, Violet Whaley's sorrowful face reflected in the glass, staring back at her. The temperature in the room plummeted. The floorboards creaked as if someone was shifting their weight. Then came the weeping, soft, mournful, echoing all around her. Claire turned on her recorder again. "Violet?" she whispered. "Are you here?" A pause, then a voice, fragile, distant. "It hurts." A chill ran down Claire's spine. The sorrow in the voice was so raw, so human, it left her shaken. She had come here to disprove the hauntings, but she was beginning to question everything. Determined to investigate further, she made her way downstairs to the former courthouse. The heavy wooden chairs stood in their places, as if waiting for a trial long since abandoned. The room was filled with shadows, darker than they should have been. Then, from the far corner, came the sound of a rope tightening. Claire turned slowly, her heart hammering. The scent of old blood and sweat filled the air. The gallows had once stood where the house now stood, and the men who had met their end here were said to linger still. Her eyes adjusted to the dim light, and she saw it, a shadow, tall and menacing, hanging in midair as if suspended by an invisible noose. The shadow twisted unnaturally, turning toward her. Claire bolted. Her footsteps pounded against the wooden floors as she ran for the door. The whispers followed her, growing louder, overlapping, pleading, warning, "Stay with us, don't leave, you belong here." She yanked the door open and stumbled onto the porch, gasping for breath. The tour guide was waiting, his expression grim. "You saw them, didn't you?" Claire could only nod, her hands shaking. The Whaley House had proven her wrong, and she would never be the same again. The Preston School of Industry loomed in the moonlight, its towering brick facade cracked and weathered by time. Once a place meant to reform troubled boys, it had instead become a breeding ground for suffering and despair. Now, the abandoned structure sat in eerie silence, except for the occasional whisper of the wind through its shattered windows. Ethan Graves pulled his coat tighter around his body as he stepped through the rusted front gates. As a paranormal investigator, he had explored countless haunted locations, but something about Preston unsettled him more than most. Maybe it was the tragic history, the abuse, the deaths, the forgotten boys who had perished here. Or maybe it was the stories of those who had never truly left. His flashlight cut through the darkness as he entered the front lobby. The peeling wallpaper and broken furniture gave the building a skeletal appearance, like a corpse abandoned to decay. He lifted his recorder. "If anyone is here, can you make your presence known?" Silence. Then, a distant thud from the upper floors. Ethan's breath hitched. He followed the sound up a flight of creaking stairs, each step groaning beneath his weight. The second-floor hallway stretched before him like an endless tunnel, lined with empty dormitories that once housed the forgotten boys of Preston. He stepped into one of the rooms, the air thick with the scent of mildew and something else. Something foul. A child's whisper echoed from the far corner. Ethan swung his flashlight toward the sound. The room was empty. His pulse quickened as he checked his recorder. "Help me." The voice was faint, but it was there. A young boy's voice, pleading. Ethan took a steadying breath. He had heard voices before, but there was something uniquely tragic about this one. "Who are you?" he asked. "What happened to you?" The room grew colder. His breath formed in the air. Then, a sudden pressure on his shoulder, light, but unmistakable. He turned sharply, but no one was there. The stories were true. Determined to press on, he made his way down to the basement, the heart of the school's darkness. If the stories were to be believed, this was where the worst of the hauntings occurred. The metal door groaned as he pushed it open, revealing a corridor lined with rusted pipes and crumbling walls. His flashlight flickered. A sudden rush of air swept past him, carrying with it a faint sound, children crying. Ethan swallowed hard and moved forward. The further he went, the more the atmosphere thickened, as if the very walls held the pain of the past. He reached a small, decrepit room at the end of the hall. Chains still hung from the walls, relics of the punishments inflicted here. His recorder crackled to life. "They hurt us." Ethan stiffened. "Who hurt you?" A shadow shifted in the corner. His flashlight beam caught a figure, a boy, barely a teenager, his eyes hollow, his expression frozen in sorrow. He wore a tattered uniform, his small hands balled into fists. Then, he was gone. Ethan's heartbeat thundered in his chest. He had seen spirits before, but never with such clarity. Never with such sadness. A door slammed behind him. He turned sharply, his flashlight flickering once more. The air crackled with energy, and the sound of hurried footsteps filled the space. Dozens of them. Running, panicked. The echoes of boys long gone, still trying to escape their torment. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the sound stopped. The air grew still. The basement was silent once more. Ethan knew it was time to leave. He had his evidence, but more than that, he had a new respect for the souls trapped within these walls. As he stepped back out into the night, the school stood as it always had, a monument to forgotten pain, where the past refused to rest, and where the dead still cried out for justice. The Pasadena Playhouse stood grand and imposing against the night sky, its old marquee flickering faintly as if whispering forgotten stories. For nearly a century, the theater had been home to countless performances, actors, and applause. But after the final curtain call, when the audience had long since departed, the Playhouse became something else entirely. Maggie Sinclair, a theater journalist with a penchant for ghost stories, stepped into the dimly lit lobby. She had covered hauntings before, but the Pasadena Playhouse had always intrigued her. Stories of a ghostly actor still pacing the stage and the laughter of a young girl echoing through empty halls were too compelling to ignore. She was met by Daniel Foster, the theater's manager, who had reluctantly agreed to let her spend the night investigating. "I assume you know what people say about this place," Daniel said, leading her through the grand foyer. "Of course," Maggie replied, glancing at the vintage posters adorning the walls. "The ghost of an actor still performing, the little girl in the hallways. I want to see if there's any truth to it." Daniel sighed, stopping at the stage entrance. "Just be careful. Some of us have seen things we can't explain." Maggie nodded and stepped onto the stage. The vast, empty auditorium stretched before her, the ornate balconies casting long shadows under the dim stage lights. She set up her recorder and whispered, "If anyone is here, can you make your presence known?" Silence. Then, a soft shuffle from the wings. Maggie's pulse quickened. She turned her flashlight toward the sound, illuminating the heavy velvet curtains. They swayed slightly, though there was no draft. "Hello?" she called out. A figure darted past the edge of the curtain. Maggie gasped and rushed toward it, but as she rounded the corner, the backstage area was empty. A sudden chill crept up her spine. She checked her recorder and played back the last few seconds. A faint voice. "Male, the show must go on," Maggie's breath caught. The voice was clear, tinged with sorrow. Was it the actor rumored to haunt the stage, forever caught in his final performance? Determined to capture more evidence, she wandered deeper into the playhouse. The hallways were eerily silent, lined with old photographs of past productions. As she reached the dressing rooms, a soft giggle echoed through the corridor. Maggie froze. It was a child's laughter, light, playful, but undeniably otherworldly. She turned sharply, flashlight beams slicing through the darkness. At the end of the hallway stood a small girl in a pale dress, her dark curls framing an expression of quiet curiosity. Maggie opened her mouth to speak, but in the blink of an eye, the girl was gone. Her hands trembled as she checked her camera. The screen displayed a blurry image, but there, just at the edge of the frame, was the faint outline of the girl. The air grew thick, electric with unseen energy. The giggle came again, this time from the rafters above the stage. Maggie rushed back, looking up at the catwalks where the little girl had been rumored to play. The ropes swayed gently, as if someone were up there, moving them. Then, from the stage below, the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps. Maggie turned. A shadow stood center stage, tall and unmoving. She lifted her camera, but before she could take a picture, the shadow dissolved into the darkness. The playhouse was alive with its past, its spirits unwilling to leave the stage they once knew. Maggie had come for a story, and she had found one that would stay with her long after she left. As she stepped out into the cool Pasadena night, she could almost hear it, the faint applause of an audience long gone, still echoing within the walls of the haunted playhouse. The Mission San Juan Capistrano stood in solemn beauty beneath the dim glow of the moon. The centuries-old walls, worn by time and tragedy, whispered stories of a past that refused to be forgotten. By day, the mission was a tourist attraction, a place of historical reverence. But by night, it became something else entirely, a realm where the living and the dead coexisted. Isabella Reyes had always been drawn to the mission, though she never truly understood why. Perhaps it was her deep roots in San Juan Capistrano, or the stories her grandmother used to tell about the spirits that roamed the corridors after dark. Now, as a historian and paranormal researcher, she had finally been granted permission to stay overnight and document the eerie occurrences that so many had reported. With only a flashlight and her recording equipment, Isabella stepped through the arched entrance of the mission. The air was thick with the scent of old stone and candle wax. Her footsteps echoed through the great stone hallways as she made her way to the chapel, the heart of the mission and, according to legend, one of its most haunted places. She set up her recorder near the altar, pressing play. "If anyone is here, can you speak to me?" she asked softly. For a long moment, silence. Then, faintly, the sound of distant chanting drifted through the air. Isabella's breath hitched. She turned sharply, scanning the empty chapel with her flashlight. The pews were still, the crucifix above the altar cast long shadows against the walls. But the chanting continued, low, rhythmic, unmistakable. It was as though the spirits of the long-departed priests were still holding their vigil. Swallowing hard, she gathered her recorder and moved toward the mission's old cemetery, the final resting place for countless Native Americans and Spanish settlers. The moonlight cast an eerie glow over the uneven tombstones, some so old their inscriptions had long since faded. She knelt beside a grave marked only by a weathered cross and placed her hand on the cold earth. "I mean no harm," she whispered. "I just want to understand." The wind picked up, carrying with it the distant sound of weeping. Isabella froze. It was a woman's cry, soft, sorrowful, full of longing. She turned, expecting to see someone standing among the graves, but she was alone. The sobs grew louder, closer. A shiver crawled up her spine as she realized the sound was coming from the mission's old courtyard. Slowly, she made her way back, her heart pounding with each step. As she entered the courtyard, she saw her. A woman dressed in a tattered white gown, her face hidden beneath a veil of long, dark hair. She stood near the ruined stone wall, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. Isabella's instinct told her to run, but her curiosity was stronger. "Who are you?" she asked. The woman lifted her head slightly. For a moment, Isabella saw her face, pale, sorrowful, eyes dark with an eternal sadness. And then, in the blink of an eye, she was gone. The wind died down, the night returning to silence. Isabella pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady her breathing. She had seen her, La Llorona, the mourning spirit who, according to legend, wandered the mission searching for her lost children. Isabella knew she had found what she came for. The mission San Juan Capistrano was more than just a historical landmark. It was a place where the past was still alive, where the spirits of the departed walked among the living. As she stepped out into the night, she could still hear it, the faint echo of chanting, the distant cries of a mother who would never find peace. The Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk, with its dazzling lights and cheerful carnival music, was a place of joy and laughter. Families strolled along the wooden planks, the scent of salty sea air mixing with the aroma of popcorn and cotton candy. But beneath the vibrant energy of the boardwalk lay a darker presence, one that lingered long after the sun set and the last visitors departed. For years, rumors of ghostly encounters had swirled among the staff and locals. The boardwalk had been a place of countless memories, but it had also seen its fair share of tragedy. Accidents, drownings, and untimely deaths had left an imprint, one that some believed had never truly faded away. As a journalist for a paranormal investigation magazine, Daniel Carter had heard the stories and decided to see for himself. With his recorder in hand and his camera strapped around his neck, he arrived at the boardwalk just as the last of the tourists were leaving. He had secured special permission to stay after hours, courtesy of a park employee who had experienced the unexplainable firsthand. The Giant Dipper, the park's iconic wooden roller coaster, loomed ahead, its red and white frame stark against the night sky. It had been in operation since 1924, carrying generations of thrill-seekers through its twisting and turning tracks. But it was also the site of one of the boardwalk's most famous ghost stories. Years ago, a young girl had fallen from the ride, her life ending far too soon. Since then, ride operators and guests had reported strange occurrences. An empty seat rocking as if occupied, whispers carried on the wind, and laughter echoing through the station when no one was there. Daniel walked up to the loading platform, his footsteps echoing in the stillness. The ride was shut down for the night, its cars locked in place. He turned on his recorder. "If anyone is here, can you make yourself known?" The wind picked up, rushing through the wooden structure like a sigh. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, faintly, a child's giggle. Daniel's breath caught. He turned toward the coaster's track, his eyes scanning the empty ride. Another giggle, closer this time. His camera snapped a picture, though he wasn't sure what he was trying to capture. He took a step forward, and then he felt a small hand, cold as ice, slipping into his own. He yanked his hand back instinctively, his pulse hammering. His camera swung against his chest as he stumbled away from the platform. The laughter faded, leaving only the distant sound of waves crashing against the shore. Shaken, but determined, Daniel made his way toward another of the boardwalk's eerie locations, the haunted castle. The attraction, designed to be filled with ghoulish animatronics and playful scares, had a legend of its own. Former employees had reported shadowy figures in the corridors, lights flickering on their own, and doors slamming without explanation. Daniel stepped inside, his flashlight cutting through the manufactured darkness. The castle's eerie decor, the glowing eyes, the creaking floors, the skeletal hands reaching from the walls, felt different now that he was alone. As he moved through the winding corridors, he felt a distinct chill in the air. Then, the sound of footsteps behind him. He whipped around, expecting to see another investigator or an employee who had decided to join him. But there was nothing. Just the still air and the dim glow of his flashlight reflecting off the glossy walls. "Who's there?" he called. Silenced. He turned back and continued forward, his heart pounding. As he approached the final room of the attraction, a long hallway lined with mirrors, he felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched. He lifted his camera, snapping a photo of the hallway. The flash illuminated the space for a brief second. And in that second, he saw a figure standing just behind him in the mirror's reflection. A man in an old employee uniform, his face hollow, his eyes empty. Daniel whirled around, but the hallway was empty. His hands trembled as he checked his camera's screen. The photo showed exactly what he had seen, the shadowy figure, lingering behind him. His investigation took him to one final place, the carousel. One of the boardwalk's oldest attractions, the carousel was known for its beautifully painted horses and whimsical music. But the ghost stories surrounding it were anything but whimsical. The tale of the young boy who rode the carousel alone had been whispered among boardwalk workers for decades. They said he appeared in the dead of night, his small figure perched upon a painted horse, his expression frozen in time. And sometimes, just sometimes, the carousel would begin to turn, its calliope playing a ghostly tune, even when the power was off. Daniel approached the ride cautiously, his recorder still running. He placed a hand on one of the horses, the smooth wood cool beneath his fingers. The boardwalk was silent, but the moment he took a step back, a faint melody filled the air. The carousel was moving, slowly, creaking, the ride began to turn. The music, distorted and distant, sent shivers down Daniel's spine. He raised his camera, snapping pictures as the horses bobbed up and down in the eerie rotation. Then he saw him, a young boy, no older than 7, sitting on a horse near the center. His clothes were old-fashioned, his hair neatly combed. He held the brass pole tightly, his small fingers wrapped around it. Daniel's breath came in short gasps. "Who are you?" he whispered. The boy turned his head ever so slightly, and then, just like that, he vanished. The carousel ground to a stop, the music fading into silence. Daniel stood frozen, his heartbeat ringing in his ears. He had come looking for ghosts, and he had found them. When he finally left the boardwalk, dawn was breaking over the horizon. The bright, lively atmosphere of the day would soon return, masking the darkness that lurked beneath. But Daniel knew the truth now. The Santa Cruz Boardwalk was more than just an amusement park. It was a place where the past never truly faded, and the spirits of those lost still rode the rides, walked the wooden planks, and whispered to those who dared to listen. The Linda Vista Hospital loomed over the Boyle Heights neighborhood like a specter frozen in time. Once a bustling medical facility in the early 20th century, it had since become a decaying relic of its former self. Broken windows stared like hollow eyes, rusting gurneys littered the hallways, and remnants of a once thriving hospital lay in disarray. The air inside was thick with the scent of mildew and something else, something metallic and stale, like old blood. Despite its reputation for paranormal activity, the hospital had become a popular site for urban explorers and ghost hunters. It was said that those who dared step inside after dark would encounter more than just the echoes of the past. The spirits of former patients and overworked nurses roamed the corridors, their agony forever imprinted within the building's walls. For journalist and paranormal investigator Alex Carter, this was the perfect story. He had spent years chasing legends, but Linda Vista was different. It wasn't just a story, it was a challenge, one he was determined to document firsthand. With only his flashlight, camera, and audio recorder, he stepped through the rusted front doors and into the abyss. The main lobby greeted him with peeling paint and crumbling tile. Moonlight streamed through the shattered windows, casting eerie shadows along the cracked walls. The once grand hospital, a place meant to heal, now seemed like a prison for the lost souls that had died within its walls. His footsteps echoed unnaturally as he moved toward the nurse's station. The silence was oppressive, thick with an unseen presence. He flipped on his recorder. Linda Vista Hospital. 11:47 p.m. The air is heavy, almost suffocating. If there are spirits here, I'd like to communicate. A sudden clang rang out from down the corridor. Alex froze, gripping his flashlight tighter. The sound had come from the east wing, the old surgical unit. His heartbeat thundered in his ears as he forced himself forward, stepping into a hallway that once led to the operating rooms. The temperature dropped as he approached room 306. It was here, according to urban legends, that a patient had died on the operating table under mysterious circumstances. A malpractice suit had been filed, but the records were lost to time. Now, those who wandered near the room reported hearing whispers, distant and sorrowful. Alex pressed his hand against the door, feeling a strange energy radiate from within. Slowly, he pushed it open, revealing an abandoned operating room. Rusted surgical tools still lay scattered across the table, and a single, overturned gurney sat in the center of the room. Then, his recorder crackled out. A low, rasping whisper slithered through the speaker. "Help me!" A shiver raced down his spine. His breath hitched as he scanned the room, his flashlight beam dancing across the cracked tiles and peeling walls. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Silence. Then, a scraping sound. The gurney moved. Alex stumbled back, his camera flashing as he instinctively took a picture. A wave of nausea hit him as an icy breath brushed against his ear. He spun around, but there was nothing, just the empty room, filled only with the ghosts of the past. Determined to press on, he left the operating room and made his way toward the morgue. If the hospital was haunted, surely this was the epicenter of its darkness. Descending the narrow staircase, the air grew even colder. The scent of decay still lingered, despite the decades that had passed since the last body had been stored here. Metal storage drawers lined the walls, some still hanging open as if expecting new arrivals. A single, flickering light bulb cast eerie shadows, creating the illusion that someone, was shifting in the darkness. Alex's breath fogged in the chilled air as he approached one of the gurneys. He placed his hand on the cold metal, half expecting it to lurch beneath his touch. A whisper. Louder this time. "Get out!" His pulse spiked. The air around him thickened, pressing against his chest like an invisible weight. Then, a sound that sent every hair on his body upright. A body drawer slammed shut on its own. Alex stumbled backward, his camera flashing wildly as he tried to capture whatever force was at work. But in the momentary bursts of light, he saw something that made his blood turn to ice. A figure. Tall, gaunt, dressed in a tattered hospital gown, its face shrouded in darkness. It stood mere feet away, unmoving, watching. Then, the light bulb burst. The morgue was plunged into complete darkness. Alex bolted, his breath ragged as he scrambled up the stairs, nearly tripping over debris. The whispering voices followed, growing in intensity, overlapping into a chorus of agony. "Help us! Don't leave! Stay!" He reached the main corridor, his flashlight swinging wildly as he sprinted toward the exit. The lobby loomed ahead, but just as he reached the door, a final voice cut through the chaos. A woman's voice. Clear. Desperate. "Don't come back." The door flew open, and Alex stumbled into the night. The air outside felt unnaturally warm compared to the freezing interior of the hospital. He turned back, half expecting to see something staring at him from the broken windows. But there was nothing, just the silent, decaying skeleton of Linda Vista Hospital, holding its secrets within its crumbling walls. Alex knew one thing for certain: he wouldn't be returning. The dead had spoken. And he had listened. And so, our descent into the haunted heart of California comes to an end. Or perhaps, it has only just begun. The stories we've explored tonight, whispers from the past, shadows that move when no one is there, echoes of sorrow and tragedy, are more than just legends. They are warnings, etched into the walls of abandoned hospitals, theaters, and forgotten asylums. They are restless souls, forever reaching beyond the veil, searching for something, or someone. But the Golden State holds many more secrets. Beyond the neon glow of Hollywood, past the sunlit shores of Santa Cruz, and beneath the cobblestone streets of San Juan Capistrano, there are countless other places where history refuses to die. The wind carries the murmurs of the lost, the unseen hands of the departed still grasp at the living, and the line between this world and the next is perilously thin. So, should you ever find yourself standing before the ruins of Linda Vista Hospital, gazing into the darkened windows of the Hollywood Roosevelt, or walking alone through the silent halls of the Whaley House, listen carefully. Feel the chill in the air, the prickle at the back of your neck, the unseen presence that watches from the shadows. These places are not empty. They never were. And when the night deepens and the world around you grows quiet, ask yourself, are you truly alone? Thank you for joining us on this journey into the unknown. If you dare to seek out more tales of terror, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, keep the lights on. Until we meet again, stay safe, and stay scared.